Great to see you all again. Hope everybody is well. Today we have a full agenda, and following on from the last meeting, we have more of a focus on climate resilience, at least in the early part of the meeting, with presentations from Anna Beswick, who is Programme Manager for Adaptation Scotland, and from Rachel Harcourt, who is a research fellow at the University of Leeds and has been playing a major role in the new Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission's Climate Action Plan development process. Then we have a contribution from Kate Locke from PCAN, looking at climate engagement and communication and the role of commissions in that. And then we have a welcome to two new commissions which are just coming through, one Kirklees and the second from Norwich. So we're looking forward to welcoming them to the network. I think we have slightly too many people to go around and do other new introductions, but perhaps as we speak, if you can introduce yourself and say who you are, then we can meet new people that way. So can we hand straight over to Anna Beswick first? Anna, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. You're doing great work in Scotland on adaptation. I know that PCAN has a link into the Sustainable Scotland Network, and clearly we have a lot to learn from your activities. Anna, please go ahead.
Thanks, Andy, and really nice to be with you all this afternoon. So I've been asked to speak for 10 minutes on the topic of how can we promote place-based climate resilience. I've got a few slides, so I'm just going to share my screen and talk through some of the work that we're involved with in Scotland, and really look forward to hearing more about your experiences in this space as well. So just bear with me while I get my slides up and we'll go. Okay, so there we go. So how can we promote place-based climate resilience? So to provide you with a little bit of context, first of all, as Andy introduced me, my name is Anna Beswick. I actually work for a sustainability charity called Sniffer, based within the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. Sniffer has many different projects and areas of work, but one of our major focuses is on pioneering place-based climate resilience. And we have a particular interest and focus on systems change and transformation within that context. The projects the examples that I'm going to draw on today are from my experience across 3 of our major programmes, including the Adaptation Scotland Programme, which Andy introduced. I'm the Programme Manager for Adaptation Scotland. The programme is funded by the Scottish Government to enable organisations, businesses and communities in Scotland to adapt to climate change. And within Adaptation Scotland, we have a strong focus on place-based climate resilience. Second project I'll draw on is our work within the Climate Ready Clyde initiative, which covers 1/3 of Scotland's population in the Glasgow city region. And the final example is the Talix project, which is a newer project. It's a transboundary adaptation learning exchange, which we are setting up with colleagues in Ireland and hopefully across the UK. So this image here and the challenge of how do we enable and catalyse local climate resilience. So Sniffer has set up and established a wide range of place-based climate resilience initiatives across islands, cities and regions in Scotland, and more recently within localities, so at the community scale. Our sort of entry point for establishing these initiatives and working with local partners is around building a business case for action. And a business case is framed around the sort of Treasury Green Book 5 case model. So we work with and alongside partners in these cities, regions or islands to understand the strategic case. Actually, what's the case for climate resilience, a focus on climate resilience in these regions? What are the shared priorities that they want to address? How will climate resilience intersect with the other priorities that they're addressing, including net zero, economic regeneration, in the case of rural and island communities, the wider sort of resilience and sustainability of remote rural communities. So the business case looks at the strategic case. It looks at the financial case, like how much is this going to cost to take joint and collective action on adaptation? How can it be funded? Where do those funding contributions come from? What's the commercial case for this? Can a joined up approach to climate resilience actually be delivered in practice in these regions? So we look at the commercial sustainability of whether this is viable for different regions. And look at the management case. So who's actually going to do the work? How will it have legacy? And through this process of establishing the business case, we aim to work alongside regional partners to establish a sort of deep understanding of how climate resilience sits within the contexts of the places that they're working in, and to identify shared objectives and priorities, to develop a scope of work that is ambitious but deliverable, and to find out how to actually deliver in practice. So we've gone through this process multiple times. It's iterated and we've learned a lot as we've gone along. These two images I chose because they represent the Glasgow City region, which is one of our biggest, longest running initiatives, and then a new initiative covering the Highlands of Scotland, which has just been established. But there are many others across our islands and other cities as well. So we start by establishing the business case, and then we build from there to implement what the partners have agreed to in the initial first phase of business case work. And the building and the implementation involves a lot of kind of rolling in and building in additional projects and additional expertise, of strengthening the sort of partnerships, the relationships between organisations, of actually building momentum and delivering work together. Photo on the left-hand side, the group photo was taken in Inverness last week. I got to have an in-person meeting, which was amazing to see these guys, meet them in person. We could all see how tall each other were. It was amazing. So this was the first board meeting of the new Highland Adapts initiative. And that group is committed to jointly funding and working together over the next 3 years to kickstart some major work there, looking at how this whole region of Scotland, which is a third of the sort of geography of Scotland, will tackle this issue of climate resilience and what that looks like for individual communities. So we started our work very deliberately by meeting on the edge of Inverness, a local nature reserve, which is just next to one of the most deprived communities in Scotland, actually. And we met one of the community members and heard about the issues they face around sea level rise, nature, but also the wider issues that are happening in that community. And that was a nice day for us. It was good to meet each other, but it's also at the heart of the values of this initiative, where we want to see climate justice actually delivered in practice. We want this to be a community-based initiative, and it was important to us at the first board meeting, kind of was delivered in that context to really remind us from the start that that's what we agreed to, and that's what we intend to deliver. The photo on the right-hand side was taken at the launch of the Climate Ready Clyde climate risk and opportunity assessment about 2 years ago. So we supported the establishment of the Climate Ready Clyde initiative, then spent 2 years developing this comprehensive risk and opportunity assessment. The evidence base for the Glasgow City region, and this launch event was a crucial moment to communicate the headline messages to senior leaders, to bring along those partners along who had been on this journey, to celebrate that milestone and to build for producing the adaptation strategy and action plan. So it's all about building these relationships, about crowding in and building in partners, added value, collaborative projects, and delivering on the priorities that partners have agreed to. I mentioned in my openings that slide that Sniffer has a real, and over time we're really developing our thinking around transformational change and systems change. We don't believe that adaptation should be, and climate resilience should be addressed independently of the wider sort of changes that we need to see in society. We think it's crucial that adaptation actions are developed with an understanding of the power dynamics and the systems that are in play within the cities, islands and regions that we're working in. And this diagram here is lifted from the Climate Ready Clyde Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan, which was published last week, and it gives you a snapshot of some of the thinking around sort of, yes, acknowledging that we need incremental action, but also recognizing that many of the things that will make the biggest difference in terms of climate resilience are more transformational and actually are not restricted to adaptation, but also integrate alongside wider sort of net zero ambition and sustainable development ambitions. But you can check out all of that on that link there, which I'll maybe pop in the chat. This strategy and action plan has been 2 years in the making after the risk assessment was published. It has firm targets. They've signed up to the Race to Resilience. All of the sort of metrics, the measurements, the economic case behind this strategy and action plan is there. And so I guess, how do you catalyze increased action and increased climate resilience? To perhaps recap on what I've talked about, it's around establishing the business case for action, building that consensus, agreeing a scope of work. It's about implementing the agreed programme of work, but also for us, collaboration has been key, building those relationships, adding value, staying true to the values that are set at the beginning of these processes, delivering like innovative approaches, pushing the boundaries of what's been possible. For Sniffer, we're not an academic organisation. We have lots of links with academias. We collaborate with academic projects, but we're principally interested in practice. So for us, it's also about taking concepts like transformation and seeing how to apply those in practice and going down that route. Finally, final slide is just to flag the TALEX project for you. So we've learned over the last decade of driving forward place-based work on climate resilience a massive amount. We see that this place-based action matures and evolves over time, that there are a lot of specific capabilities that are needed for it to mature and have impact. So we're working as part of this project to develop a capability maturity model that will map out and hopefully visualize how place-based climate resilience initiatives mature over time, with the aim of helping those who want to implement these kind of things in future to basically, it's a way for us to share our learning, and it's also a way to hopefully accelerate the work of those that are already active in this space, and through that establish a sort of community of practice. So at the moment we're working with colleagues from Dublin, London, obviously Scotland, Belfast, colleagues in Wales as well, Greater Manchester. I think Kate Lonsdale is also involved in this project as well. And we hope, we're at the very start, but we hope it will be a really helpful space to really support the advancement of this kind of work across the UK and Ireland. So that's me. That's how you can get hold of me, and I'll stop there. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Anna. That's really interesting. I think there are various things there that we would love to talk more about, but if we have the next presentation from Rachel, and then we can ask questions in the round, if that's okay, if you don't mind staying around for that. So Rachel, would you be able to step in now and give us your presentation about our Yorkshire and Humber experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just start sharing my screen. Okay, so yeah, I'm here to talk about the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission and our sort of resilience planning. We're in a totally different place to where Adaptation Scotland and Climate Ready Clyde are, in that we're right at the beginning. We're only a couple of months old. And I guess what I'm going to sort of take you through is our very ongoing living trying to put this resilience plan together. So I suspect in this group you might have had a brief intro to the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission before, but if not, just a quick reminder, here are our 4 key aims, one of which of course is climate resilience, plus the other 3 on that slide. And then to support that, we've got a number of panels and work groups in place. And I sort of work on the climate resilience working group, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. It's co-chaired by 2 people, one from the EA and one from a utilities company. And then I guess we have about somewhere between 25 and 30 other members who kind of pop in and out of meetings. I'd say we're only a few months old, sort of April time we got started. So we've had sort of 5 sessions, I guess, so far. And then there is a plan for the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission to work up an action plan that will then go out for consultation in September time and then be launched officially sort of November time. So ever since we've got going, we've really been sort of full steam ahead trying to focus on pulling this action plan together. And that's mainly what I'm going to be taking you through today. But actually in our first session, we did get a minute, or we had about an hour really, to try and step back just for a second before we got into the action plan and think about, do a sort of visioning session of what does a resilient Yorkshire and Humber look like. And you know, here's a diagram showing what we came up with. And I guess the size of the bubbles do somewhat represent the extent to which people talked about these things. So unsurprisingly, people talked a lot about people and society. A resilient Yorkshire and Humber is one that is led by its people, led by its communities. Communities have huge capacity to kind of make their own decisions and take their own actions, and lots of other things about improving inclusion, improving equality, and also health and well-being, really important there. Planning came through hugely as well. Collaborative planning, I think that I expected that maybe. I was a bit more flexibility in planning is such an important part of being resilient. So again, thinking about this bottom-up approach, people needed to be able to take their own approach to this and just not be dictated to. And then something else that came through was this idea of preparing for the future and having very honest conversations about some of what's ahead is quite scary and quite tricky. Some of it we aren't really sure about yet, but nevertheless, we need to take action, and ideally action that allows us to prepare for several possible futures. So just a glimpse at some of what we talked about when we said, okay, what does a resilient Yorkshire and Humber look like? We've then divided our resilience working group into sort of 5 smaller groups, each working on a sector to try and build out this action plan. But as each of these groups are working, actually there are a lot of commonalities coming through in terms of what they said was really important. So we've also put together in one of our sessions a list of principles of the resilience section of the climate action plan. Don't worry, not going to go through all of this, lots of words on this slide. And actually a lot of the principles are exactly what you would expect. Things like we need to think about inclusion, we need to think about engagement, we need to think about governance structures. But the one I will pull out is the top one, which is this delivering a narrative of more, because I think one of the things that's come through our conversation so far, and the sort of, Anna talked about this a little bit in her presentation just now, is this idea of it needs to be much more than just about climate. So there's lots of other challenges in the region, you know, about our communities and about individual well-being, you know, health and well-being, and various other issues that actually we could put climate resilient actions in place that also address some of these other issues. And I think also the other important thing here is so much of the climate conversation can be quite negative, either about impacts that I say can be quite scary, or it's about things you need to do less of, eat less meat, fly less, and what have you. And actually there's a real opportunity when we're talking about resilience, and I think net zero as well, but today we're talking about resilience, to talk about this idea of it's more than just resilience, it can offer, you know, lots of other benefits as well. So that's a real, I guess, red line priority principle that's running through everything that we're thinking about so far. Let's say we've got 5 sectors, and I'm just going to take you through each of those now. The idea is that they will each come up with a sort of vision of what that sector, a resilient version of that sector could look like, a set of priorities to focus on, and then an action plan. So a real sort of do now, do soon, do later. That action plan is being developed as we speak, and it's not really ready to present to you guys today. What I am going to just take you through is what the priorities that each of the groups identified. So starting with our first sector, which is people, health and well-being. And the vision that this working group has come up with is this idea of thriving people in vibrant and healthy places. And the priorities that they've identified that they think our Yorkshire and Humber Action Plan really needs to focus on, again, reflecting on the vision that I mentioned a second ago, the importance of building community ownership and capabilities. So really sort of empowering people and making sure that individuals are the decision makers for their own communities and areas, and really leaders rather than just being told what to do. Huge opportunity to address climate and health challenges. The Yorkshire and Humber region performs below the national average on a number of kind of wellbeing metrics. So, there's lots of actions that we could take which might address both climate issues and other health issues. And there, I say there's a number of them, but one of them, for example, is increasing blue and green spaces and making those much more accessible for a greater number of people. And then there's also a need to account for diversity, and obviously diversity in all its various forms. But one, I think, key one for our region, amongst others, is this idea that, like many regions in the UK these days, we have these very dense, quite heavily populated urban centres, and then much more sparsely populated but geographically larger rural communities, and planning for both of those. Our second sector is land, nature and food, and their sort of vision is a vibrant and improving natural environment, providing benefits for our communities. And the priorities that this group is working up, and then say we'll develop it more into an action plan, or is doing it now. There's an opportunity to coordinate ongoing work regarding land use change and land use and change of land use. So there's certainly, I think, stuff happening at the national level. There's definitely already stuff happening at the regional level, but because we are a regional body, there's an opportunity for us to sort of coordinate this and make sure that that's all sort of adds up. So that will be one of our focuses. Within this very huge sector, land, nature and food, there is the potential for competing interests. And I'm particularly talking about sort of the biodiversity and environmental restoration piece. And then on the other side, production of food and also farmers' livelihoods. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting those necessarily have to work at loggerheads. I don't think they do. I think they can work very collaboratively, but there is a potential for them to have competing interests. So again, as a regional body, we have an opportunity to ones included, and that those approaches are aligned. There's obviously also national targets been put in place around restoration and sustainability of nature, and just thinking about what that means at the regional level and how do we deliver that, and perhaps go a bit further on some of it. And then also building skills and capacity to deliver knowledge on the ground. And again, this particularly focus on the farming bit. It's obviously a huge farming community region. And I think there was a sense that there is a huge amount of knowledge about what more sustainable farming looks like, what more resilience farming looks like, or food production, but perhaps that's not yet filtering down onto the ground with, perhaps an aging farming population. So putting those bridges in place. Our third sector is business and industry, and here the vision that the team are working on is this idea of a sustainable low carbon economy, providing green quality jobs and investment. Now here, out of all of our sectors, I think there's a sense in the group that perhaps business and industry is not yet so well engaged in resilience. Perhaps it is in the net zero piece, but not so much in resilience. And I think part of that's just, it's a huge sector again, and made up of lots of sort of individual businesses. And, if you think about SMEs, it could be a huge amount of people that we're talking about here in terms of communicating with them and getting that message across. So I think we feel like one of the biggest priorities here is just making climate resilience action meaningful in our region, and in terms that make sense to them. So what's it going to cost me in time, what's it going to cost me in money and other resources, and also communicating this bit about uncertainty. There is some uncertainty, but we still need to take action. So how do we help business and industry think through that? Once we've got across the meaningfulness of this issue, then we need to start thinking about what does a climate resilient business look like? So, okay, I'm on board, I think I need to be a climate resilient business. What does that mean? So again, I think there's a real opportunity here for us to share case studies and learnings and put networks in place and all that kind of stuff that really starts to what type of business are you, what size are you, where are you, and all those sorts of things, and what does resilience look like for you? And then thinking a little bit more longer term, there's an opportunity, again, a big region, a very industrial region with a big industrial heritage, perhaps become a national leader in the development of green economy skills. And again, here thinking then about opportunities for young people, opportunities for new jobs and technology and other capabilities. Our fourth sector of 5 is infrastructure. And the vision here is affordable, low carbon infrastructure, reliably serving communities. And perhaps unlike business and industry, I think there's a sense that infrastructure is very familiar with this resilience and adaptation piece, and has been for several years. There's things like the adaptation reporting powers in place that has sort of forced infrastructure organisations to think about this for some time. But nevertheless, there is a sense that perhaps we still need improved alignment of across infrastructure sectors, particularly if we think during a hazard event where they have real knock-on impacts to each other. How do we sort of make sure that alignment is in place? And also perhaps there's still some sectors not so well incorporated, things like communication networks. So definitely some stuff to do there. Also thinking about nature-based solutions and how we build those alongside other types of solutions, for example, engineered solutions. And then there's I think again, a longer term piece perhaps around planning standards, policies that can help us thinking about long-term resilience infrastructure. So for example, if we think about housing, there's been a conversation for a while about housing standards that, limit emissions, thinking about the net zero piece. But do we need planning standards in place that, for example, make sure homes are climate resilient? And what does that mean for wherever those homes are being built? So a big piece around planning that we've only really just sort of started to think about. And our final sector is emergencies, and the vision here is collaboration and preparation, delivering best practice capabilities for responding well. Of course, already in place, some resources, networks, training in place to address when we have kind of emergency situations, but in recognition that they're going to get much more frequent and potentially much more severe and also much more complicated if they start sort of happening at the same time. All of that needs to be escalated in the region. And very closely linked to that, there's a need to develop resilience to known events. For example, we know it floods in Yorkshire and Humber. So really, making sure we're as resilient as we can be to those things we know to expect, but also readiness for unexpected events, and particularly when events might start happening, say, at the same time. So in January, for example, of this year, we had a major flooding event in Leeds and other parts of Yorkshire. Plus, we had a large amount of emergency vehicles on the roads because we were in a particular peak time of COVID. So those kind of events coming together, and how do we plan for those sort of unknown or unexpected events, but still making sure that we are ready for them. And then a need to increase and improve support for those immediately affected, and to some extent that's sort of at a sector level. So thinking about how do we make sure schools are ready should they need to close again suddenly for whatever type of event. How long did it take to get schools online, that kind of question. But then also thinking about support for individuals or individual communities if you've just been flooded. How do we make sure those communities are sort of maintained and that the well-being is maintained and all those kinds of things. So yeah, support sort of for during and after the event. So that was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour for everything that we've been working on. Our next steps, as I say, we're currently developing those principles into and constantly reviewing those principles. This is a very kind of half-baked live thing that I'm showing you. Into action plans, do now, do soon, do later action plans, which is what's happening now. And then also, I think there's a big piece to do around making sure we've got good cohesion between the sectors and also with net zero. So we have a really, cohesive Yorkshire and Humber climate action plan. But that is where we're at on that. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Rachel. Really good. And yeah, obviously, I'm essentially involved in that climate action plan. So I completely endorse what you said about this being a work in progress. Yeah, we will have that action plan together for consultation in September and then be publishing it and launching it at the time of the COP. So loads of issues coming up here. And, I think it's quite common, even in the chat too, that, amongst PCAN commissions, most of the emphasis, I think, has been on net zero and on mitigation. And adaptation and resilience has been relatively underemphasized, and part of the point of today was to begin to address that. When we launched the Yorkshire Commission back in March, we really consciously set out to make sure it was more balanced and that we didn't allow net zero to almost crowd out everything else, which was a bit of a worry for some of our key members and constituencies. So it's fantastic to see this work coming through. We have about 10 minutes for questions now. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. But if I can start using my chair's privilege, if that's all right, by asking Anna. Anna, you mentioned about closing the adaptation finance gap in Climate Ready Clyde. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to this desire for what we set out in the strategy and action plan to be implemented in practice, and obviously funding and finance is a large part of that. We know that there is a finance gap in terms of the level of risk that we're facing because of the unavoidable impacts of climate change and the costs of dealing with those risks. There isn't currently the finance in place to deal with those. So a key priority within the strategy and action plan is around innovative funding and finance mechanisms for enabling climate resilience. That doesn't always mean just more funding for climate change adaptation, although it will need to mean that, but it means like looking at the economic case for the actions that are put forward in the action plan. So for each of the interventions there's an economic case that sits behind them and looks at how they might be funded and financed in future.
And have new ways of financing resilience or adaptation initiatives come out in the Glasgow area, the Clyde area?
Yes, it's a very live topic at the moment. Obviously, there's Kit England, who led on the development of this work with Climate Ready Clyde, has now moved actually into Glasgow City region to lead the sort of Green New Deal financing and funding, which is directly linked into the delivery of this strategy and action plan. So we don't have all the answers in terms of the finance mechanisms and what they will look like, but there's a strong sort of commitment to finding those levers. We're working with Paul Watkiss Associates. Both, like Paul did a lot of for those of you who aren't familiar with Paul's work, done a lot of work at the UK level on climate risks and the kind of economics that sit as part of those, and he's done similar work for us in the Glasgow City region and is also working with us through the Adaptation Scotland Programme, looking at how we develop more innovative funding and finance mechanisms for adaptation. So it's a space that we really want to grow in. Yeah. Great.
I think that, yeah, there seems to be a particular gap in that area, and PCAN's finance platform has acknowledged, recognised that, you know, finding better ways of funding resilience investments, and, you know, the insurance industry is one way, but then, you know, there are all sorts of social benefits from adaptation which are not monetized, and somehow the business models to collect some of the benefits to enable the investment to take place, I think, are yet to be developed.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, Andy, and what you see coming through the sort of multilateral development banks as well around the funding and financing of like major built environment and infrastructure projects, including those that are primarily focused on delivering net zero, have to take account of climate risks and adaptation isn't optional when it comes to funding and finance. And so we need to be seeing it not as a separate issue where we've got to figure out how to adapt it. We have to look at how adaptation sits within, and actually funding and financing adaptation can unlock the potential for multiple benefits. So that's the sort of thinking that we're pursuing at present.
Great, thank you. Please, for everyone else, please, if you have a question, please raise your electronic hand, and we can invite you in. In the meantime, Rachel, we've heard a little bit about the need to balance adaptation and mitigation, and we've talked as the Yorkshire Commission in terms of, you know, how do you have net zero consistent adaptation, which sometimes when you're pouring a lot of concrete for a flood protection scheme, you know, seems a way off, but also how we can have resilient net zero transitions. Can you talk a little bit about the working group and your thinking on how to join them up in a balanced way?
Question. Yes. Well, I mean, yeah, I think I can see in the chat there's quite a lot of discussion about this, you know, adaptation sort of versus mitigation, and I think there's a bit of a danger in thinking about them two separately. I mean, I know in our commission we specifically put resilience in place, you know, made it a sort of separate issue to make sure they got the attention. But actually, you know, I also think there's a bit of a danger of splitting them up too much because they are so intertwined, and also, you know, one of the things we talk about in terms of your question quite a lot about in our group is that people not working in this space don't understand that split anyway, and don't sort of think about the terminology in that way. So I think we're progressing this resilience plan, but constantly thinking, we have to put this back together with the net zero place, and ultimately have to create a sort of, to borrow the climate ready client's phrase, climate ready Yorkshire and Humber plan, something like that, rather than an adaptation and a mitigation piece, because that's not really how it works in practice, and not really how people understand it either.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that the whole area of green infrastructure or green-blue infrastructure and nature-based solutions is one area where the two agendas meet and overlap in a particularly effective way. I'm thinking especially of Hull, and Hull's, Hull had basically the option to build a massive concrete ring main with loads of concrete and steel and pumps that would consume electricity to deal with its flood challenges, or to do what it did in the end, which is to build a number of nature-based flood bowls. And A, was much cheaper, B, much more nature friendly, B, C, way more popular with the public, who had more green spaces and more nature-based areas around them. And D, obviously, was very effective, from what I understand, much more effective than people had originally thought. So to me, that green infrastructure aspect, or the nature-based solution aspect, is a kind of, how many wins are there in that win-win-win-win kind of aspects of what we as a commission could be promoting and calling for in the region. Can I ask any of the other commissions on the call, has anyone focused on the resilience agenda as well as the net zero agenda? Gideon, can I ask you, sorry, I know the Kirklees Commission is only starting next week, but we have had a little bit of conversation. How do you think Kirklees Commission could balance the overlapping interests in both adaptation and mitigation?
I think we've got to bring them together. I just put in the chat, excuse me, that I don't think for us in this space that we necessarily think of them as separate. I can see lots and lots of synergies going on with these things. The symbiotic relationships of what's going on, I think, will very much be there. I think it's how we talk to other people as well. We've been talking a lot about mitigation for a long time now, and then we're switching to adaptation. And while we understand what we mean and why we're talking about it, I think it could confuse other people a bit. So I think from Kirklees Climate Commission, which is now a real thing, and I'm really excited to be having the first meeting with it next week, is that we need to make sure that it balances all of the different aspects of it. So for instance, for our rural community, we're going to have to think about what that means for them in as much as we do for the commercial or building sector or others as well. And I think it's trying to think of what we can do in terms of each of the elements, the mitigation and adaptation, to actually bring those together to show their opportunities.
Thanks, Gideon. Anna Bullen from CAT, can I ask you as well, you said in the chat about how you have focused on mitigation but are increasingly looking at adaptation as well. Presumably it's not an either or, it's a both question, but can we ask you to expand on that a little bit and tell us more about what's happening at CAT?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the early days when we were really focused on developing solutions to the climate crisis, that was kind of very much our focus, and that we started out 45 years ago, and we definitely had time at that point. But even when we set out on our Zero Carbon Britain research, and we started that nearly 15 years ago, where we were doing the modelling and the research to demonstrate what a net zero, what a Zero Carbon Britain could look like, and we demonstrated that we had the technology, etc., already in place. It doesn't mean there's not room to develop that further, but we demonstrated that we have got that technology. But I think, as I said in my comment, we are seeing the climate crisis in the news headlines every single day. We're seeing it on our doorstep. We're seeing it around the world. And I think our feeling has been it's irresponsible, might be too strong a word, but it would be irresponsible to just stick with the mitigation narrative, that we have to start looking at adaptation and resilience. And we do a lot of that with our master's students as well. And certainly in the work we're doing, that I'm doing with the Innovation Lab, we explore that too. And I think, it's interesting. I think, I agree with Gideon. I don't think we're separating the terms. I just think we've got to look at both. And in a way, I don't tend to use those terms depending on who I'm communicating with. If I'm, in this arena, of course, yes, we talk in those terms, but if I'm working with a group of councils or something, or public or businesses, we're more focused on the interventions, the potential interventions that will inform and enable systems change to address the climate emergency, rather than really getting into the detail of, is this adaptation or is it mitigation?
I think that the work that Kat did and is doing has been such a massive source of inspiration for so many of us. So thank you for that. It's fundamental to the way we think now in a way that perhaps wasn't 20 years ago. So yeah, that's hugely welcome. I suppose the last point quickly is to say about the risk of the feedback loops, that as the world gets warmer and the need for adaptation becomes more pronounced, that the danger is that it then leads to more, an increase in carbon emissions. You look at forest drying or moorland burning, or the lack of, planning for heat waves in cities leading to the spread of air conditioners. And, there are so many feedback loops which run the risk of, taking us into a different dynamic where we lose control of the future in this way, that, having this balanced approach to adaptation and mitigation seems to be so central. But Jonathan, completely take your point about the challenges that commissions face in terms of resourcing, and, whether we would run the risk of spreading ourselves too thinly. At Leeds Commission, we decided to focus on net zero primarily, but to have a watching brief looking at adaptation. And for the regional commission, it felt more logical at the regional scale, given river catchments and that kind of thing, to consider adaptation at that level. Paul, I wonder if I can put you on the spot a little bit about the North East Climate Commission. Paul Ennals, I see you're with us. What approach are you taking? Is the North East Climate Commission just focusing on net zero, or also looking at adaptation?
Well, we're looking a bit beyond net zero. We're also looking at biodiversity and the need for a just transition. But all of them actually probably fit more within the mitigation space than the adaptation space. And the overall conclusion we've taken so far is there is more than enough for us to focus on mitigation. And the structures for addressing some of the biggest adaptation issues within the Northeast are actually quite well structured. So, the Environment Agency with local authorities, with the key voluntary organisations, etc., have got quite a robust, quite effective process of doing the joint planning around flooding, which is the most significant. I take your point, Andy, about the range of other potential long-term impacts, but the Northeast is not one of the climate hotspots in terms of areas that have been particularly identified as places that will be hit early directly by climate change within the Northeast. So therefore, put crudely, we're really sticking to mitigation. But we are extending into the biodiversity issues, which obviously have a lot of kind of links across into the adaptation agenda.
Great, thank you, Paul. That's completely understandable, of course. Tom, you had your hand up. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Tom.
Apologies. Tom Flanagan, Interim Director of the Manchester Climate Change Agency. But apologies, the background is of North Berwick in Scotland, which is where I live normally. So Manchester is looking at both adaptation and resilience as well as mitigation. We have an embedded researcher, Dr. Paul O'Hare, who's been seconded to us from Manchester Metropolitan University, and Paul is looking in detail at this. He's about to take some vision and principles around adaptation and resilience to our partnership next week. So if they're approved, I'm happy to share them with the network. We're really looking at what we've called progressive resilience, picking up on Rachel's point in her presentation about the linkages, particularly with social justice and a just transition. And we're pretty clear now that unless we address adaptation and resilience, we'll miss our mitigation targets because there's such a linkage. So particularly around nature-based solutions, for example, where dealing with resilience can also support mitigation. So yeah, we're looking at the whole gamut of responses around climate resilience really, but interestingly, the IPPR launched today linked climate and nature. So I think that will come up more strongly in terms of the linkage between resilience and mitigation.
Great, thank you, Tom. I'm sure this is an issue we'll need to come back to, and I think those interactions and how you develop a climate resilient net zero plan, but also a net zero climate resilience plan, I think is perhaps a point for a future meeting. Andrew Kithriotis has also put up a link to a very relevant paper, which is very welcome, from the Lincoln Climate Commission. So thank you. I think we'll wrap it up there on this point, but it does feed through very closely into our next point, which is from Kate Locke, who's Policy and Communications Manager for PCAN, and also central to Leeds Climate Commission and Yorkshire Climate Commission too, about how we communicate. It's come up a couple of times, that people may not understand the differences between these. But Kate, would you care to step in and talk for 10 minutes, and then we'll have a chance to ask you 10 minutes as well, questions for 10 minutes about how commissions can promote engagement and communication with different communities.
Sure, thanks very much, Andy. Can I just check you can see my screen?
Yep.
And is it full screen, or have I still got the presenter?
No, it's on presenter mode. Click that button.
That's what we need, isn't it? Great. So thank you, Andy, for introducing me. And I just wanted to say it's great to see so many familiar names and faces on the call today. Having been involved obviously with PCAN from the start, seeing our network growing and seeing many of you I've communicated with in one way or another over websites or whatever. So it's just great to see this network growing. So yeah, Andy asked me to talk about how climate commissions can pursue and promote climate engagement and communication. So that's my job. That's a huge subject, and we've got some experts on the call, including Asha Min, so I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about this. I'm going to talk to you about a campaign we're doing in Leeds, but I'd like to propose that maybe in a future PCAN Network Plus meeting, we could really drill down into climate communications and communicating through our commissions, and get you more involved and hear from you and what you're doing, because I think it would be so valuable. But anyway, today I'm going to tell you what we're doing in Leeds, which is a campaign, a social media campaign called Leeds Acts Together.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. If you we can see your sort of presenter screen at the moment. If you click, there's a button just to the left there that's like a screen. It's that one, I think, yeah.
I'm not getting anything now.
Hasn't done it. Actually, sorry, it might be display settings at the top. Sort of top left, there's a display settings thing just so that we can see the full screen.
Is that any better?
I think if you press that original button again, and we should be on.
Well, this one.
The first one turned it to a black screen for some reason. There we go. That's perfect.
So you can see the whole thing out. Great. Okay. Sorry about that. I thought I got that right, but every time it seems to be different. Thank you, Simon. Okay, so the context for the Leeds Acts Together social media campaign goes back to 2019, and our Leeds Climate Change Citizens Jury And one of the key recommendations that came out from the jurors, they had a set of recommendations, but a really key one was the need for a citywide communications drive. And they call for clear, positive and practical messages which emphasise the necessity for individuals, community and organisational action at all levels. And I observed the jury a number of times, and you know, the interest and concern and relevance of communication was something they emphasised a lot. So I was really pleased to see a key recommendation from the citizens jury. That was back in 2019, and also for a bit more context, in 2019 we had the Big Leeds Climate Conversation, and that was a citywide conversation. We had, I think, nearly 8,000 respondents to that. 9 out of 10 of the respondents said they were very worried about climate change, and many didn't know where to start to begin to take action. And one of the other findings that's relevant for this campaign is that almost all respondents believe that public sector organisations and businesses have a responsibility, and that's not just to reduce their own carbon footprint, but to make it easier for individuals to make more environmentally friendly choices. And that's also something that's influenced our campaign. Moving on, the third kind of contextual background, if you like, is from the Leeds Climate Action Readiness Assessment that Leeds Climate Commission ran last year. And we conducted a series of participatory workshops with stakeholders. And those were on a range of sectors. They're transport, public buildings, commercial buildings and housing. But across the sectors, one of the main findings, again, there were lots of findings, but one of the key ones was the need for a campaign to communicate the benefits of, as it's phrased here, whole community regeneration through taking climate action. And in fact, Rachel's presentation just now really struck a chord, because I think, Rachel, when you were talking about the need for delivering a narrative of more for the climate resilience action plan, you know, and that need to talk about the opportunities to address other pressing issues by tackling climate change. You know, this is the same thing. So this message is just coming through, you know, across sectors time and time again. And the other bit of context is from this year, in fact, actually today it's happening, is the national spotlight that's being put on Leeds by BBC Radio 5 Live. And they are conducting year-long coverage of Leeds' mission to become a cleaner, greener city and to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. And there's monthly themed coverage woven in throughout a full day's programming, very often with live broadcasts from Leeds. Their first one was live from the Holbeck in Leeds, and Andy was on it. And today there is their next programme. They missed out June because of the football and Wimbledon, but they are live from Leeds today from Kirkgate Market, and all sorts of exciting things going on there. There's a great opportunity because this spotlight is being put on the city, and they are tracking us, they're following the stories, they're talking to people in Leeds, and they're saying, you know, how are you going to do this, and share your stories. So this creates an opportunity for us, and the opportunity we came up with as a commission as a social media campaign called Leeds Acts Together. And that title, if you like, was given to us by the citizens jury as well. That was kind of what they titled their recommendation. And we thought it was really appropriate and works very well for this. So we brought together a number of professionals working in communications and public engagement across Leeds. And we're using the opportunity provided by the BBC's Spotlight to run a separate, parallel social media campaign. Obviously, they're not campaigning, they're broadcasting. So this is separate, but we're using the opportunity to kind of hopefully, you know, be able to connect with a wider audience that they can provide with their national spotlight and different kinds of audiences to run this campaign. And we're running it for a week, a month, to coincide with 5 Live's broadcasts. And our ask is to organisations and to businesses, at least initially, but we might, I think, transition towards individuals more possibly come October. But the ask now is going back to the findings from the Big Leeds Climate Conversation about people wanting, you know, a lead and examples and inspiration from organisations and businesses. So they're our focus for the time being. And we're asking them to share the actions they're taking so they can inspire, encourage and demonstrate leadership and promote engagement in order to help everybody in Leeds to do their bit. So the offer to Leeds organisations is to be part of a citywide campaign. so that everyone in Leeds can benefit. And obviously, the more organisations that take part, the better it will be. And it's an opportunity for them to demonstrate practical actions that they're taking and to promote existing compatible aims, things they're working on. All the participating organisations get a shout out and a retweet and shares from Leeds Climate Commission through our social media channels. And there's also the potential to add organisations' case studies to the success stories on our website, and lots of stuff has been coming through today. So, you know, we don't want it to just be a social media campaign. That's what we're doing at the moment. That's all we've got the resource for. But we hope that this will be an opportunity to encourage organisations to start to have discussions within the, you know, within their organisation about their own net zero journey. And as part of the offer for them, we've also providing suggested social media templates, updates, and free themed graphics for them, which again were produced by someone gratis for us who works in marketing. And again, this is part of this kind of collective approach. When you have no money and little resource and time, it's the collective that makes it work, will hopefully make it work. So the ask is for organisations to sign up. They get updates from us, to share the campaign through their networks, to communicate with their own organisation's marketing and comms people and get them to participate, to talk to colleagues and ask them, you know, what can your organisation contribute? Again, talking about its own net zero journey. Obviously, to participate, to post, to use the hashtag, it won't work if they don't, and to spread the word through whatever channels they normally use. Obviously, we hope that this will engender practical action, not just social media wealth. And also, we're asking them, can you help us? Can you lend a hand? Can you give us any resources? So that's the offer. Just as a little update, it started in May. As I say, nothing happened in June because of the footy. So 13 organisations took part, 11 on Twitter, 4 on Facebook, 2 were on both. The hashtag was used 27 times on Twitter and 12 times on Facebook. So we weren't exactly trending, but it was a start. Since then, when I last looked, 43 organisations and businesses have signed up for campaign updates. I suspect that will have gone up again because it just keeps climbing regularly, and we're communicating with them quite regularly. We have a core planning group. So we, within the engagement and comms panel, we have a small team of committed people who get together for 1 hour, one lunchtime a month, and kind of bash out the next month's campaign and talk about it. We have a target for July. As I said, 13 took part the first time. Well, we'd like to up that to at least 22 organisations, especially more anchor institutions, also SMEs. And we have some targets, potentially 70 organisations by November and 120 plus by May next year, because that's how long the broadcast will be going on for. Those are a little bit drawn out of the air. We'll see. We haven't got the data on this month's campaign because it's ongoing, happening this week. So we'll find out at the end of it. But it looks to be already. I did a very, very rough count of the hashtag use, and it was double what we had last time, and that's only midweek. So that's looking good. So future comms plans. Yeah, just checking I haven't missed a slide. Obviously, we want to evaluate what we're doing and respond to that evaluation as we go along. And we have a master's student who is working on that and for her master's project. So that's going to be really, really helpful that we can do that. In terms of other things that the Engagement and Communications Group, the Leeds Climate Commission, is doing, we're also going to be involved in a civic engagement workshop this year, which has come out of some University of Leeds research. And it's very relevant to what we're, you know, the kind of things we're discussing in the campaign. So we're excited to be doing that. We're looking next year to build on the potential of the Leeds Acts Together campaign. Could it be extended beyond social media, which will completely depend on resource and response. But I think the opportunity to build or extend the Commission's community is significant. Moving forwards, we're also looking at developing next year a citywide climate communication strategy, possibly aligned with the Leeds Net Zero Carbon Roadmap, and potentially using the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit, although other toolkits are available. And then finally, moving on from that, even longer term, we're looking at co-creating a positive narrative for Leeds and bringing in just about everybody that we can and making sure all voices are heard and we can tell a really positive story about Leeds' future, which is already starting to happen, I think, through the 5 Live stuff. So that's just a bit of a whistle stop, but I'd just like to say thank you very much to my colleagues, especially Simon Moore, who's on the call today, and to Catherine Graves, who's also helping out with some of the posting and stuff. It's a team effort, and I think it's worthwhile. But yeah, it's a bit of work, but it's definitely worthwhile. If you want to get in touch over any of it, there are the links.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Asha, Kate name checked you earlier. I wonder if we could ask you to come in a little bit with some thoughts on, how a commission could have a communications plan to, influence people across the city. Is Asha still with us?
I think he's just popped out to collect his daughter from school, but he will be back kind of in the next few minutes, I think.
Okay, thanks, Emma. We'll pick it up with him when he comes back. If anyone else has questions, please flag your hand. Paul, sorry to pick on you again, but when you launched the North East Climate Commission, you did a great job, we thought, of mobilising lots of other actors to endorse and support and get behind the work of the Commission. Can you just, sorry, it's a coalition, not a commission, but can you just say a few words about, how you mobilised and engaged with that broader network and what impacts it's having so far?
Yeah, thank you. I think some things we've managed to do successfully, and we've been more and some we haven't. So I just want to be clear on that. And I will say something brief about the areas where we're significantly behind where we were hoping to get to, and behind where many colleagues on the call have reached. I think we've been making really good progress with aligning businesses with the aim of becoming England's greenest region and tackling the 3 areas of zero carbon and biodiversity and a just transition. We're approaching 4 figures of businesses that are now signed up as supporters of NECO, of the North East England Climate Coalition. And we're similar with organisations, a very large number of voluntary organisations who are getting quite enthusiastic about all developing. We've been developing a carbon footprint tool for voluntary organisations, encouraging them all to be using it, pooling the data with a bit of data support from others, and trying to generate a kind of a movement for non-environmental organisations to be doing a lot of stuff. Several other bits I could talk about, but just to briefly touch on the area that's been giving us the greatest problems has been the political engagement, where we've had lots and lots of contact from local authorities across the region of the 12 local authorities, but the political leadership across the 12 authorities is very split at present, and indeed, put crudely, the top 7 don't like to speak to the bottom 5. I'm sure it's nothing to do with the fact that the bottom 5 is now a Conservative mayor, and within Tees Valley has been attracting a lot of very significant investment with our support. But often they've done so in competition with the 7 more northern local authorities who have not been so successful, is a nice way of putting it, which means getting a collective across all 12 local authorities join up and willingness to work at that level across the full region, we are still short of. So we're working one level less strategic than we had really wanted to do. We're looking to try and tackle what seems to me to be, as a consequence, a bit of a democratic accountability gap, through starting the process of setting up a permanent climate assembly within the region with a strong focus on equality, diversity and inclusion, to seek to ensure that our work as the coalition will be accountable to a very diverse group of people whose voices are not always heard. Whether that'll work, let's see. I mean, because there's also accountability to the range of officers and organisations that are involved. I was really encouraged by the discussion just been having from led by Kate on communications. Our communications officer started yesterday, so I've been busily screenshotting your slides, Kate. It would be even easier if you felt able to share them, and then I will introduce you properly to our comms officer, of course, once she's got her feet properly under the table, because we have fairly significant comms plans in the run-up to COP26, with a lot of sign-up from businesses, organisations, including local authorities and the utilities, to be sharing our approach to events and comms, and having a collective approach to the BBC and the ITV and the regional TV and radio, to establish a kind of a schedule for the media coverage in the run-up to COP, and then in the months following it. Is that enough to get started? I'd be happy to say any more if you like, but that's probably enough for now.
Absolutely, thank you, Paul.
Paul, I'm happy to send the slides, but what I'll do is I'll put them on as a download on the page as well. If you don't know, there's a page on our website. I'll put the link, or Simon can pop it up from the PCAN website for the PCAN network. And just another a bit of promo. The PCAN network has its own LinkedIn group, so we were trying to look to find best ways to communicate across this network. So if you're on LinkedIn, look for the Place-Based Climate Action Network group, and we put updates in there as well. Of course, you can post in there.
Great, thank you. Asha, I think you'd popped out, but we're looking forward to hearing from Emma in a second about the forthcoming Norwich Commission. But Asha, you're a acknowledged kind of expert leader in climate comms across the country. What are your thoughts on how a commission can best communicate and engage with the public? Are there key things that you think you'd like to see? Oh, sorry, Asha, I thought you were back online, but you're not. No. In which case, could I ask Alice, are you there? Alice from Bristol.
I am indeed. I'm right here. Hi, Andy.
Hi, Alice. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Nice to be here.
Great to have you with us. Bristol Green Capital Partnership has just done some amazing work over the years on community engagement and communications and so on. What do you think the main advice you would give to other commissions would be to do that, recognizing maybe the resource constraints that a lot of us are under?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. We're so just a quick introduction. I'm Alice, and I'm the interim COO for the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. So I came on board a couple of months ago to stand in for Lizzie, who's on maternity leave. It's a really interesting time, as I think it is for everyone right now. We're a small part-time team, and we're in a sort of really busy delivery phase at the moment, but working on some super exciting initiatives that include our Black and Green Ambassadors Programme, which is about celebrating and empowering diverse environmental leadership across the city. We've also got our Climate Action Programme, which is about working with small to medium-sized businesses and organisations and enterprises across the city to support them on their climate action journey, regardless of where they're at. And we've also got our Community Climate Action Project, which is really exciting and a really interesting phase right now. We're working with 6 community partners across the city that have been identified as communities, both geographic and demographic, to help them build, well, it's really what makes it very unique is that they're co-designed, co-produced, and will be co-led climate action plans. So what's quite interesting about this is that it's a unique model that we're not just designing it with them and giving them the sort of expertise and support to help them with that, but they will be delivering it themselves. So we've got support from various organisations and Bristol City Council and the Climate Action Fund by the Lottery. And at the moment, those communities are working, or they've identified their carbon emissions, and they're currently working on those plans. And I think certainly the learnings that we're seeing and that we're hearing is that it's really important to meet people where they are at right now. You know, we recognise that the communities we're working with, you know, it's not just about being inclusive, it's they are the experts. You know, they speak the language, they know their communities, and they know what they need. So the programme is using creativity as a tool to connect. We've just commissioned 2 artists to engage in the run-up to COP, creative workshops and craftivism, doing random acts of peaceful protest to help engage the wider communities around the climate action projects and help to inform the climate action plan. So I think my learning just during this short journey that I've been with the partnership is just trying to meet people where they're at and understand their needs and work with communities at their level. And I'd be happy to share some links in the chat around some of those projects.
Thank you very much. That's great. A couple of things coming up for future meetings, perhaps where we could discuss them. A key one, I think, is how do we as commissions mobilise resources? We're all operating on a shoestring to a greater or lesser extent, and there's a massive amount to do with a very limited amount of money. So I think it would be great for us to maybe for the next meeting of the Network Plus to discuss how we can mobilise different forms of resources and make the most of the resources we have got. The other one that came to mind for me was one we're grappling with in the Yorkshire Commission as well, which is what Paul mentioned about the politics, of how do we, how can commissions provide that kind of cross-party ongoing commitment to climate change action over time? How do we navigate the challenges of the kind of political landscape in different places? I think that's a common challenge too. We have a couple of hands up. Just quickly, Brett, good to have you with us from Coventry.
Apologies, I couldn't be with you sooner. I had a scrutiny committee on biodiversity to deal with.
Well, Brett, you're really quiet. I'm not sure why.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, right. Yeah, so apologies, I couldn't be with you from the beginning. I think these are recorded so that I can actually see the previous recordings. Is that right?
You can, yeah. We'll be circulating afterwards.
Yeah. So for us, yes, in Coventry, the communications side, the COP26 has been getting masses of interest from all different quarters, and the problem being for us is around trying to get a focus coordinated across all the different organisations. But something that we are doing that has been accepted at the COP26 at the event will be a thing we're doing called Carbon Family, which we're working with the BBC. Who are working on a documentary, which the product later on in the following year is actually a sculpture that's going to be made from waste materials that an average family produces in a year. So it's kind of symbolic. It be in the city centre, and it'll be kind of a constant reminder for people about the amount of waste that we currently produce, and it's kind of a good thing raising awareness around circular economy. It is interesting that we do have a lot of political discussion now and understanding that the need for resource around communications is key to this, which I think is being that's helpful. So at the moment it's an issue of us finding resources, but we also have a network of businesses, and we are currently producing a series of webinars aimed at a network of about 1,200 businesses within our city region around environmental management, energy management, kind of the broader issues. It's broadened out a lot more on wider sustainability issues. But that seems to be received really well, and it's a really effective way of getting messages out to the private sector. And we're finding that one's working very well. And at the moment, we're working with a potential sponsor to progress that to a podcast to become a national podcast for aiming at businesses and environmental management of businesses and energy management. It's something that's got a long history in Coventry. The organisation, the first Business Sustain, set up about 20 odd years ago. So it's kind of got a long history, and it's sort of gradually progressed to now a sort of a pretty sizable team by all rights and purposes, which focuses on that. But I'm finding that's another avenue that's quite useful, is about how we engage with the private sector and use the private sector to kind of engage with their through their consumers, through their public that they have relationships with, as another avenue.
Absolutely. That's been very effective in Leeds as well, working with the Chamber of Commerce, or we have a property network, property forum, which brings together all the main, developers and construction companies and property owners. There's been a great way of amplifying our message out quite quickly and easily. Thank you, Brett. We now have a feed into an introduction to the New Norwich and to the the Kirklees Climate Commission. Ash is back online. So Emma, can you give us the introduction, and then Asha will come to ask you the question about how the New Norwich Commission can communicate and engage effectively. But first of all, Emma, can we have a brief input from you?
Hi, yes, I had done a slide back, Pat, but I'm really conscious of time. So I'll just give a really quick sort of 5-minute overview of where we're at. I mean, firstly, I'm Emma Smith from Norwich City Council. I work in our strategy team. It's really great to be here, and it's really exciting and really informative to hear all the work that's been going on. So for me, it's brilliant to be on board. We're quite early on in our journey in terms of setting up a Norwich Climate Commission. Work has happened sort of 10 years previously around this sort of work in terms of sort of partners, but that hasn't quite come to fruition in the way that we would have liked. We've now got our Norwich 2040 City Vision, which was launched in November 2018, and that was informed by a large piece of independent research that went out and spoke to residents, visitors, stakeholders, businesses from across the city about what we wanted Norwich to be like in 2040, and obviously sustainability, social mobility, the green economy were really strong themes coming out of that piece of work. We've now got a really proactive group of partners across the city that steer that sort of piece of work. And that sort of is made up of all the key partnerships, including Transport for Norwich, Local Enterprise Partnership, Healthy Norwich, Norfolk Chambers of Commerce, the BID, etc., etc. We've got schools on board, and out of that sort of group of people, we've got a set of willing volunteers that are billed as our sustainability working group at the moment. And we had our third meeting today, at which obviously you came along and joined us, Andy, which was brilliant. And so we're really kind of on this sort of first steps of setting up a Norwich Climate Commission, I think. We've got a good working relationship with Asha, who's obviously on the meeting, and I think he's going to be really instrumental on our journey. And in terms of sort of next steps, we've got some mapping going on. So as you highlighted in the meeting earlier today with us, Andy, there's a lot of really great stuff that is happening, but people on the ground don't necessarily know about that. So we really want to shout about those successes. We've secured an intern from our university, the University of East Anglia, who'll be carrying out some research around urban greening opportunities for the city. We've got an Upcycle Your Waste project taking place, and they've got an ecothon in a couple of weekends. So that's looking at how we can utilise waste as sort of, turning that into future products. So key waste streams that we're looking at include cardboard, plastics, broken glass, coffee grounds, orange peel, etc. And then, for us, it is about mapping out what the next steps are and identifying those key milestones for setting up the Norwich Climate Commission. So I won't talk on too much today, as I say, because I'm conscious of time, but I think if we could secure a spot at a future meeting to tell you more about our journey, that would be great. And I'll probably be in touch with quite a number of you on the call today to pick your brains.
Thank you, Emma. Absolutely, we'd love to have an update on progress and hear more about the ongoing work. And great that the Commission's coming through and that you're with us in the PCAN network. So that's wonderful. Asha, can we ask you quickly to go back to the communications point? What would you envisage the Commission in Norwich doing on communications and engagement?
Yeah, and sorry for being absent. Communication in our house isn't quite what it should be, so I had to rush out and pick my girl up from school. So despite that, I am actually a communications person. I'm also the one of the directors of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. So that's how the relationship between the University of East Anglia and Norwich Council and all those other partners that Emma spoke about. I mean, I'm still, what I want to do really is consult, so because I've got my ideas. I'm especially working in climate change communication for a long time, so I have my ideas for what it is that I think Norwich Commission should do. But I'd really like to consult with pretty much the organisations, the people in those organisations that Emma spoke about. And there was some early dialogue earlier. There's both the net zero and the adaptation aspects that I've done some work on as well, which is quite useful and relevant to Norwich. There is one other thing from the communication point that I've been toying with, and I'd be interested in everybody's ideas for this. So thanks for having me, having us, all the PCANs. Is actually there's something under the UN called ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment, ACE, and it sits under the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change, which is what COP26 is all about. So I'm also quite interested in looking at that, the framework that already exists, and place-basing it to Norwich, really, to very much to engage with people where they are, what their sphere of influence is, and move out from there. And another reason that I'm very excited about PCANs is because I've been communicating climate change at quite the global level, an international level for many years. And so to actually do it from a place-based perspective, I think is often missed in the big pieces, the big communications, the big that's something that I'm going to play with, I think, but that's just my opinion. We are a consortium, so I'm going to take other people's views on this before going ahead entirely.
Great, thanks, Asher. I think that ACE framework is something I hadn't heard of before, but certainly worth us looking into. And yeah, as before, it'd be great to hear more about the Commission as it moves forward. Slightly conscious of time, can we flip to Kirklees? And I think we have a brief input from John and Rioghnach. John, Rioghnach?
Hi, Andy. Yes, thank you. I have got a couple of slides which I will zip through quite quickly because I am conscious that we're in the graveyard slot. But thank you everyone for inviting us today, and thank you also to the earlier presenters as well. Lots of really exciting stuff, and I think you really see the value of the PCAN network when you get that kind of information cascaded. So my name's John Atkinson. I am the Energy and Climate Change Team Leader at Kirklees Council. I'm here with my colleague Rioghnach today to summarise really how we've gone about setting up the Kirklees Climate Commission. And I've also, well, in the audience, there is also two of our commissioners, Gideon and Chris. So hi, Gideon and Chris. So hopefully we'll give a good summary, but right, here we go. I'm sharing now. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
And are you seeing the right screen? Are you seeing the full slide and not the summary sheet?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give a quick introduction about Kirklees first. This is where we are. We are in West Yorkshire, adjacent just to the west of Leeds, one of the 5 West Yorkshire local authorities. Kirklees is one of the big metropolitan districts. Doesn't have a city, but the key towns are Huddersfield and Dewsbury. It has an interesting kind of identity in itself in that it's made of north and south. The north is the bit that sticks up at the top here, so that's kind of Dewsbury and northwards, and then the south is Huddersfield, the satellites, and all the small towns around that. So it goes from sort of inner city urban areas to sort of more rural traditional farming communities, pockets of deprivation, pockets of affluence, and then a big corner of the district is also in the Peak National Park as well. A significant part of which is upland blanket bog. So I always like to think Kirklees has a bit of everything really when it comes to almost like kind of the country in a microcosm. So I will proceed to talk a bit about how we came to a climate commission. The council declared a climate emergency in January 2019. Our initial response was set out in November of that year, which included a target to be net zero carbon emissions by 2038. Linked to that was a package of measures that we've been progressing since, which we've called phase 1. And I think probably the key one of those has been the creation of the Kirklees Climate Commission. So we were very keen from the council point of view to support the creation of a climate commission in Kirklees. And I think we undertook to initiate that and to play a leading role in it. But at the same time, it's not intended to be a council-owned thing. It's very much an independent entity. So we're bringing together sort of the partners across the district to work collaboratively and positively to support action to address the climate emergency. We've also will be working with the Yorkshire and the Humber Climate Commission as well. And it was interesting earlier, the discussion around the mitigation versus adaptation. And I think one thing that's always appealed to me from the sort of climate commission methodology has been the way that they can operate at different scales, I suppose. So it seems to me an obvious fit for Kirklees to focus more on mitigation at a local level, but then to support perhaps the Yorkshire and Climate Commission in a more adaptation related focus when you're looking more at, say, a sort of a river basin management scale as well. But I stress that's my own view and not a view that the Commission has yet taken. So we're in the position now where we have on the cusp of establishing a climate commission in Kirklees. The first meeting will be next week. But this is really just to talk a bit about how we've got to that point. I think actually probably as everyone in this call knows, setting up a climate commission is quite difficult. So the methodology that we finally sort of alighted on as a way to do it was to set up an interim advisory panel with some cherry-picked individuals from across the district that designed to be broadly representative, to meet to agree some draft terms of reference and to help with the recruitment of individuals to sit on the commission as full commissioners. And we were very fortunate in this process to have some time from Andy, who chaired that advisory panel process for us. And I think that really helped us out when it came to sort of addressing some of the niggles that we came across on that process. And obviously the experience from Leeds and the other PCAN commissions was very valuable in that process. And then the Kirklees Commission will have secretariat support from Kirklees Council officers. So there's myself and Rioghnach that's on the call as well. And I'm now going to pass over to Rioghnach, who will quickly go through the recruitment process and who we have on the Kirklees Commission.
Yeah, I'll be speedy as I can. So the website was kind of our main focus for getting it launched, so everybody could apply through the website, sending in an email. So big thanks to Kate for helping us set that up. That was really helpful. So from there, we kind of use social media quite a lot. We utilise the council comms to get the word out, but we also had a lot of really good networks within the advisory panel. So using people's connections to reach out, using our Business Hub newsletter to reach out as well. And those endorsement tweets from Leeds Climate Commission really helped as well, I think. So thanks for that. In the end, we had 25 applications, and the selection panel then met to discuss applications and agree the appointments. So those people were from the advisory panel. So yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, John, that'd be great. So our two chairs, we've got our actual chair, the proper one, is Peter Roberts. He is he's got a wealth of experience, but he's currently the chair of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. He lives in Kirklees, is local to the area, and is very keen to get going, so that's great. And then we've got our vice chair, which is Councillor Will Simpson. He is our Greener Kirklees and Culture portfolio holder. I think I said that the wrong way around, but he's really there to get the sort of the political element of it, making sure that it is a I've lost my train of thought now. Democratic accountability, that's what I was trying to say. And keeping the council sort of tied in, but also, you know, keeping it independent and being the best for the residents. Right, John, next slide, please. And these are our commissioners. I'm not going to go through everyone, but as John said, Gideon and Chris are on the call today. We have got quite a large number, there's 17 there. And that might not be it. We are looking to fill some gaps. That's something that I'll be talking about at the commission meeting next week. Also looking at the element of youth commissioner or some kind of youth engagement as well, following on from the council's climate festival for young people earlier on in the year. So good engagement there. But yeah, no, so it's exciting times. The first meeting is next week. If you could just change the slide, John. Yeah, at Dewsbury Town Hall. It's a hybrid meeting, so we'll see how it goes. Some people are coming virtually, some people are coming in person, so it's going to be exciting to see everybody there. And they're going to be agreeing the terms of reference and going through some important points and getting going. So yeah, the second public launch, the proper launch, will be in the autumn. That's our contact details. Thank you. Sorry, that was really fast.
I know, it was great. Thanks, Rioghnach. Thanks, John. Also wonderful to see another commission coming through, and looking forward to the commission taking shape and you know, fusing and so on. Again, as with Norwich, it'd be nice to have you back and to hear about progress fairly soon. I'm aware of time. Seb, thank you for flashing up the message about Essex Climate Action Commission and the launch of your report next week. I'm sure some of us would love to join you there. And there are a range of other points in the chat which we'll take on board too. We're really interested to hear any thoughts that you have for future meetings of this network. There are a few key points that have come out of the conversation today, one of which being about resources and how we mobilise resources to enable commissions to be effective in different ways. Another might be about the politics and how commissions can engage with different forms of politics and, you know, navigate their way through to make sure they're effective and have an impact there. And then also the links between adaptation and mitigation, I think are ongoing. So yeah, a few different ideas, but thank you so much for being with us today. Do get in touch if you have other thoughts on topics you'd like us to address in the future. And also if we can support you, promote you through our newsletter and websites and activities, that would be great. And one last point, big point, is that the PCAN Innovation Fund is just opening now for bids in the autumn. We will circulate some details to you. We are looking for bids not necessarily on supporting individual commissions, but on supporting work which is relevant across all of the commissions, as it were. If you would appreciate a chat on any of that, or if we can help you to develop bids and offer guidance, then we're more than happy to. It's not one of these formal structures where, you know, we won't, you know, talk to you about the money that we have to distribute. So please do get in touch, and more than happy to have a call and to work with you to refine ideas for bids. Deadlines in September, I think, for phase 1. Very light touch application process initially, and then there'd be a shortlisting and a slightly fuller application for round 2. So thank you very much. Thanks for all your comments in the chat too. Sorry we've overrun a little bit, but great to see you. Have a lovely summer and happy holidays for those of you going away, and we'll see you all soon. So thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye now.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.